My name is Najla Hafiz, and I graduated from the American School of Dubai.
My name is Colby C. I did my entire schooling at NESA schools.
My name is Kapita from Cairo American College.
Gregor is Kaye, and I've been at 2 NESA schools, Damascus Community School and the American Community Schools of Athens.
My name is Nicholas Lafam. I attended the American International School in Riyadh.
My name is Kulsum Lakhani. I went to 3 international schools, the American School of Dubai, the American International School of Dhaka, and then the International School of Islamabad.
Eepyung Ri. I graduated from the Walworth Barber American International School.
Tia Lazarus. I graduated from the American School of Bombay.
My mother is Bangladeshi, my dad is Pakistani.
So I grew up in Damascus, Syria, born to a Syrian father and a Greek mother.
I was 2 or 3 when I started school in Italy. By the time I was 5, that was my first entrance into a formal international American school in Mozambique. After Mozambique, Bangladesh, and then Mozambique, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and then Egypt.
I was a Vietnamese American living in Saudi Arabia.
I actually grew up in Mumbai. I was considered one of the local families.
My father is a diplomat for the Republic of Korea.
I am Egyptian, and I went to Cairo American College.
My parents are international school educators, and I was born when my family was teaching at the Karachi American School.
How did growing up internationally affect your identity?
Growing up internationally, it allowed me to see myself as one among many. It was easier to connect to the common thread of humanity that we all shared.
I'm actually a minority in India. I'm Catholic. And so growing up there was always sort of a minority, and then leaving the country actually made me feel more a part of the whole. It was easy to be a chameleon almost. Like it was easy to switch and change and fit in, I think, very easily.
I wasn't Bengali enough in Bangladesh because I didn't look Bangladeshi, and then I moved to Pakistan where I spoke more Bangla than I spoke Urdu, and I didn't really feel Pakistani either, and I was literally pulled out of being surrounded by my family to live in a city where I had no family. I think the international school system actually gave me a safe space to be nothing in a lot of ways. So I was Bangladeshi and Pakistani, but I wasn't really either.
I think the development of my identity was in many ways detached from other types of groups. But I didn't really have any strong sort of orthodox notion of what it meant to be Nepali or even what it meant to be a Nepali woman. But I'm not like a typical anything except like product of an international school. Mm-hmm. And so I answer it with passport and then as I need to, as I see fit.
So I can definitely relate to what you were saying there. I mean, for me, a lot of the times, my identity is defined where I am not. So, being an Australian in the United States, I'm not Australian, I'm American. But being an American in Australia, I'm not Australian, I'm an American.
So I'm trying to think how I would have developed a little differently had I not been in the international school. So when people ask me where are you from, I tell them oh, I'm from South Korea. But culturally speaking, I think I am 50% Korean, and then the other 50% I consider myself to be American culturally speaking.
I relate to everything you guys said. The Syrians don't think I'm Syrian enough, the Greeks don't think I'm Greek enough. You just have to live with anxiety and this gray area.
Spending so much time at the International School of Islamabad, everybody knew me on campus because I was there for so long. But when I came to the American School at Doha, it didn't help that I looked like I was in 7th grade. So then that kind of like dovetailed into me being kind of really reclusive because I didn't know how to build those relationships anymore. But that all changed, later on and became integrated into the community.
And in one of the, more crucial years of your schooling, I just kind of picked myself up and then went into another school system. It was a different country and different people, but the sense of community was the same. Our world is super small when it comes down to it, and especially within NESA schools. Then I had a great year.
Up until this point, I thought it was really bad being the child of a diplomat because you have to leave your friends every 2 to 3 years. So now I have to go and make new friends. But there was an escape at the end. I could always, wait until 2 years to pass by, and I could have a completely fresh new start.
It was one of the biggest culture shocks that I think I've had. I think it was really the only school I had attended among international schools where the majority of people were there for either diplomatic or oil or other commercial purposes.
My, background was also guided by the idea that my parents were refugees and immigrants to America. And so, you should appreciate sort of the privileges that you currently have now that others may not have had. I work in government and I've done a lot of social activism and I worked in politics and public policy. And I think that career path was instilled and the seed was planted in Azar.
For me, home is something that has always felt safe in the bubble of like everyone being kind of from everywhere but just kind of sharing the same values.
Did the school bring out the best in my identity? And I don't think so. School gave me one side of my identity in the context of both schools. It just kind of helped me shape a part of it. And it wasn't until I graduated and went off to university when I kind of really got to be a little bit more autonomous and a little bit more in a driver's seat.
We're so privileged, we kind of take it for granted a little bit that everybody has this upbringing or this background or this life. To have that and to really question identity and who you are. It's important, I think, for third cultural kids to be able to figure that out at an early age and understand who they are and where they are in the world.
A third culture kid is a kid who has had to straddle multiple cultures and barriers and grown up mostly in the countries that they're not from. And if they are growing up in the countries that they are from, they're still growing up in a very different, almost foreign environment.
I wasn't the one that was moving around a lot, and so my cultural identity was a little bit confusing because, I have the Egyptian side, and then there's also the side of me that feeling like a global citizen.
I really had this juxtaposition of being in an international school and having all these different types of friends, and then leaving, and then still going back to my local community and being able to bring the divide and break down that wall because I couldn't really be two different people.
A lot of things that maybe wouldn't have been an opportunity for me before became an opportunity, such as sports. That was a huge part of my life when I was in CAC and ASD, especially as a woman, as an Egyptian Muslim woman. And I didn't even have to think about it because it was just part of my life at school.
Knowing your heritage isn't just about your ethnic identity and your where your parents were born and all that, but it's also the journey and the social historical forces that led them from Vietnam as refugees to America. In some ways, by moving overseas, you kind of put that, you paused sort of all that because you were experiencing this whole other universe within the context you're in.
Diversity is about a lot more than nationality and different ethnic or traditional experiences.
It would have been very important for me to learn that my cultural background and my global outlook was different than a typical domestic student in the United States. The language of culture was definitely used in school. In terms of global culture, though,
you don't really get to study the culture as much if you don't even speak the language, right? And there's this guy straight off from South Korea, and he doesn't really know anything about your culture. You know, do you have really any incentive to talk to him or play with him or like crack any jokes with him? Humor is different in Western culture and Korean culture.
At the time, it really seems like it's the most important thing in the world. You're having lunch alone, and that takes its toll on you, and that affects how well or not well you learn. So being acutely aware of that and putting systems in place to rectify and to potentially improve that is, I think, of the utmost importance.
So much about the 1971 war between Bangladesh and Pakistan played into how my peers, especially my Pakistani peers, like would react about how we taught 1971 in an American classroom versus in a Pakistani classroom. We talk about the war very differently. It's seen through a Pakistan lens.
Being at an international school and having the kind of support that I did at home was a really amazing experience in getting to be Nepali from a place of strength and not feeling as though I had to be protective of my identity. I think that international schools often do a very, very poor job of being able to address that on their own. Schools, and especially teachers, would make offhand comments as well that indicate that maybe they have no sense of what it means to be a South Asian woman or a South Asian girl in a school.
I think there was this idea of, tolerance and acceptance that were the values. The trade-off was that it made it harder to really understand what it meant to be a Vietnamese American. There weren't really many other folks who had the same identity as me, and there wasn't necessarily role models you could point to.
We don't all have the same stories as to how we got somewhere, but on the other hand, I do think that there was a dominant narrative that was both given to us, but then also sort of a dominant way of doing things based on what an American international school curriculum looks like and what it looks like when you have predominantly Anglo teachers, no matter where it is that you're going.
Living in America, you might grow up your entire schooling with other Asian American friends and friend groups around you, and then naturally you segue into college and it's like that as well, right?
Even if it wasn't purposeful, white people were mostly hanging out with each other, black kids were mostly hanging out with each other, Asians were together, and there wasn't a lot of people that transcended those types of boundaries, and that's where it was a little difficult for me, to be honest, because I don't think I'd ever realized that things were different outside of my environment and how naive I had been actually about the fact that all of us can get along.
I went to the University of Kent in Canterbury, and what's interesting is I really didn't fit in with the Indian students coming in, and I ended up actually being best friends, dating, just really being involved with the Pakistani community because a lot of them had come from LAS and ISI and all the other international schools, and I think we had a much better rapport than just kids coming in from India or just Pakistan or just other countries.
So I spent that entire time when I was in college thinking that really something was wrong with me, why I was being viewed as a novelty and why people didn't understand me.
The cultural difference in the US has been a little bit difficult, as you can imagine. You come from a place, where everybody understands you and understands where Egypt is and where Argentina is and where all these other countries are, and then you're like, wait, where do I fit in here? And like where am I and where am I actually from, and how do I build relationships with people who don't understand that? And I remember in first grade, I'll never forget, we had so many class pets, and we had the opportunity to take them home and develop a good sense of responsibility.
There were lots of programs that were sort of designed to get you out of the classroom and explore the surroundings. You spend a week in the outdoors in a Bedouin camp, learn about the Bedouins and their stories, sleeping in sleeping bags outside in the desert, and what to do and what not to do if you see a scorpion next to you when you wake up. Things like that. A lot of fun and also enriching experiences, I would say.
Every single day we had a 15-minute period called DEAR, D-E-A-R, which stands for Drop Everything and Read. And during this period, you just had to pick up anything and read it. It made learning fun. That is something that stayed with me to this day. If you look into my bag at any given moment, I've got something I've got a book, I've got something to read.
Going to a school like that gives you such an immense privilege to be able to experience art and music and things that are outside of the norm of just going academics and straight academics. And I think that was something hugely important for making me more of a whole person.
Having a committed, peers who were wanting to be successful in their own way, wanting to do well and wanting to be better, helps to motivate you to be a better person and to be, the best version of yourself you possibly can be.
I think I really got a lot of support from my teachers. All of them were not only great educators, but also really good advocates for you.
I think all my teachers had instilled different lessons in me about whether it was, checking additional sources before coming to a conclusion or questioning sort of why things are the way they are.
Ms. Hurley is really the instructor who most stands out for me because she was so committed to making sure that students were self-motivated and driven, because she tried a lot of different methods with us, and it felt like she would experiment, but she was also very intentional in the way she went about it, and because she pushed us to think about what we were doing well or not, and she would critique us, sometimes maybe too harshly, but I think helpfully.
I ended up going into education and teaching because of Mr. Morales. It was either biology or English, and I was like, no, it has to be English, because he really awakened it. We did a lot of literature that was based in India, and I had never read that before, and he had specifically chosen stuff because obviously of where we were, and just discovering that and discovering a lot about myself.
So DCS stands for Damascus Community School, and it was a community in the truest sense of the word. People students, parents, teachers would hang out at the school some days until 6, 7 p.m. just because it was a very, very fun, energetic place to be. That led to lifelong friendships, and it led us to kind of being invested in both our education, but also the stuff that comes after, the extracurricular activities.
Learning that there is more to the world than nation's borders, or even just outside of your own local community. Learning that we're all interconnected, and learning how to cross those cultural bridges when faced with a culture that I'm not familiar with. I know that there's always going to be a commonality, and I really picked that up from being in an international school.
Coming into your own really came about when, we're looking at theory of knowledge a little bit and discovering how you know something, and then you have to reflect on your own beliefs and your own faith. At ASB, you were given the freedom to now choose who you want to be and how you want to be this person, and not just rely on, tradition or other things like that.
The emphasis on service learning and community service in school, it allows you to, for sure, think more about other people and other cultures.
So many of my friends that have graduated from international schools, and specifically my international school, have that same sense of civic responsibility, whether that means they're of service as a foreign service officer, whether they've gone into development. So many of us are so united in this idea of not just individuality, but we're part of a collective. In the international school system, because it's so much communal, it's this small community, the collective is really important. And I think that's what starts to instill in you that there's this idea of something bigger than yourself. And I really do credit my international school education for that.
One of the biggest problems is a lack of class diversity in particular, and the kind of thinking and self-reflection that promotes. The families, for example, that my classmates came from, what it means that they're running businesses or that they're in political parties, and I wonder to what degree their showing of respect or not for peers when we were in school came from knowledge of that position. But I think having scholarships, having different kinds of ways in which people can enter international schools, maybe having ways that we are engaging more with peers at other types of local institutions would be really helpful.
Some way to make schools more open to introverts rather than extroverts. It's not in our first nature to be proactive about reaching out to other people. And then the second thing is giving high schoolers more exposure to the offerings that colleges have.
What does technology mean in this grand scheme of things? What does innovation mean? What is going on outside of the school campus? I think is really important to think about the education not as a static, in a classroom type of model, is something that will be consistently changing as kids, as learners, are constantly changing too. I think creating more space for that type of experiential learning, for getting kids out there and understanding, that there's more to life than just straight academics. And that the most important thing is to just listen, and to listen to the students that you're teaching, right? Because oftentimes they're at the pulse, they're the heart of what's happening, in the center of what's happening.
Given sort of the world that we live in now and the conflicts that we see and the rise of xenophobia and homophobia and misogyny and Islamophobia, NESA teachers are on the front lines of being able to develop human beings who can not just push back against these negative elements, but also to thrive and be leaders to help counter some of these negative and inhumane and immoral sort of ideologies and movements.
It's what we can do with them, with their passions, and streamlining those passions, getting teachers involved, getting the local community involved, getting alumni involved. Why not open it up to all NESA schools, and have like this alumni base or database of people in different fields with different passions, where we can connect current students, because having schooling within this bubble and your disciplines and keeping them all separate is not going to work. I was talking with the other graduates earlier, and we were looking back at our time there, and we realized that we had very little connection to what was actually happening outside, in terms of current affairs, like the political environment. It was very sheltered, and I think we all grew up in schools and in areas that had so much happening, and yet we were a little bit in a bubble.
In a school of the future, I think that fostering a good environment for students to come up with their own ideas in when they're younger would be great, because I didn't have exposure to entrepreneurship until I was in college. Teachers now and educators now need to start thinking more about what are other options when people leave, like when people graduate from high school.
Being in an international education environment, being in an international environment, there is a real focus on hyperschooling. So the students that aren't scientifically or mathematically or engineering inclined quite often can feel left behind and not supported. And I think that is really a shame. Schools need to honor that pathway, honor a student's choice, and honor their what they've determined to do after school. If they're not going to go to that Ivy League school, that's okay.
It's not a one-size-fits-all model. It's about customization. It's about custom-made learning. It's an a la carte. It's not an imposed way of thinking. Otherwise, you risk students being apathetic, which I think is the worst thing that could happen. A student loses interest in his or her learning and just doesn't really care. Gavin Newsom says, he's got this metaphor about life being like a vending machine. You put your coins, you pay your tuition, and you get something out. And if you don't like what you get out, what do? You shake it. I wish schools were more susceptible to kind of students shaping them and shaking them.
you.